Is she not uploading anything for week 10? Oh, it doesn't look like a journal book. That's awesome. It doesn't look like it. Oh my god, that
Besides
is...
the one that we're turning in.
Right. That's way better than having 2 to do, though. Oh, man. Oh, wait. I might have lied.
Don't lie to me. Don't make me feel happy. Don't take my happiness away.
Because it's March 19th. Yeah, okay, so that's for today. That's nothing that's reading. But Thursday there is.
You just ruined my happiness.
I know, I'm sorry. I ruined it for me too. And our proposal's due on Thursday too.
Yeah. Did you?
I have started mine.
Did you look on the website? Is that finally there?
Yeah.
Did you upload it?
Yeah, she
Finally?
sent me an email how to get to it.
Can you show me?
So we got an exam on Wednesday, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it'll go through everything that we cover up through this particular lecture, which I don't think will be all that long. Last time I know we were talking about reptiles. I'm not sure exactly where we started. We pointed out a lot of differences between reptiles and amphibians. So for example, reptiles have epidermal scales, whereas the amphibians did not. But we also see in the reptiles a lot of dermal bone. So bone can be produced in tissues that are homologous to the dermis of the skin, or bone can be produced within pieces of cartilage. So we can have cartilage replacement bone or dermal bone. And reptiles have lots of examples of the dermal bone. They have these tiny osteoderms, the turtle shell, and then those abdominal ribs or gastralia. Respiration differed in the reptiles compared to the amphibians because the amphibians force the air down into their lungs with positive pressure, whereas the reptiles now have adopted a different technique, and that is they expand the rib cage using their chest muscles, and that draws the air in by suction. There was a difference in kidney function that correlates with the more terrestrial livelihoods, if you will, of the reptiles. There was a switch from urea to uric acid. And uric acid does have the advantage of requiring less water in order to get rid of it. You can concentrate it more greatly in the body without toxic effects. So if it takes less water to get rid of it, you can use that water for other purposes. That potentially is important in a terrestrial environment. We did go over the temporal openings. So these were things that occurred in the reptiles independently. A number of times they evolved independently. And the reasons for those temporal openings, presumably, are to give the jaw closing muscles room to bulge, and perhaps a way of attaching more strongly to the skull. The two of those things combined then would allow these animals to have a stronger bite and therefore open up more potential niches. And then we have the anapsid, which is without a temporal opening, uriapsid, synapsid, and diapsid conditions. They, again, were in different groups of reptiles from the extinct marine uriapsids. Synapsids gave rise to the mammals. Diapsids, of course, gave rise to birds. And if you're trying to remember where those openings are, that little word best. So if the squamosal and postorbital bones are coming together below the opening, then it's uriapsid. If the bones are coming together at the top of that opening, then it's synapsid. And then finally, we finished up with the impact hypothesis, sometimes called the Alvarez hypothesis. And this just dealt with why did most of the reptiles, especially large reptiles, disappear at the end of the Cenozoic and beginning of the Mesozoic, which could also be called the end of the Cretaceous, the beginning of the Tertiary. So it depends on whether you're looking at the big periods or the smaller epochs. Anyway, there was a lot of evidence to suggest that there might be an asteroid impact at that time. It's basically geological evidence. So iridium, shock quartz, and stishovite are all substances that you tend not to find very commonly on the Earth, and they are common, relatively speaking, in rocks that formed at that time period. They all suggest that there was some kind of a large explosion, huge pressures, etc. The effect of that collision was not the immediate death of the animals, but it hindered photosynthesis by throwing up dust into the atmosphere. Photosynthesis was hindered. That then led to disruption of food chains. So your plants are dying off, so your herbivores are dying off, so your carnivores are dying off. And as it says, most of the large reptiles were killed off. Questions? We're going to finish up reptiles today, and we're going to do so, I think I need this on eventually, by just mentioning a number of different things about snakes. And we do snakes because snakes just have a lot of cool things about them, you know, that differ from most other terrestrial vertebrates. So we're going to concentrate on locomotion and body anatomy. We may get to a few other things as well, but we'll start off with locomotion. And I'll put this back up here for the time being. Okay. All right. They're legless, and so that alone makes them rather unusual among the terrestrial vertebrates. They're completely absent in all families except, so appendages, all vestiges are gone except in what family?
The Boidae?
Yeah, the Boidae. Okay, so that was part of the lab exam the last time. So in the boids, you do find vestiges of the girdles and the limbs. And these typically are called either claws or perhaps more commonly spurs. So the vestiges of the limbs are called spurs in these animals. And they don't function in locomotion, of course. They're really, really tiny. But they are going to function in copulation and courtship. And I'll show you a video or two later on of these things in action. And so, depending on the species, the males will do different things. They'll beat them together to make a noise, or they'll rub them up and down the cloacal area of the female. So they are used in the process of courtship, trying to convince that female that she should mate with that particular male. So they're very unusual in that they don't have legs except these vestiges. They also have numerous ribs, which makes them different from virtually all other terrestrial vertebrates. And these are highly numerous. I mean, you can have 100 to 400 pairs of ribs in snakes. So when you think of our body, we have ribs just around the lungs and the heart. But in a snake, those ribs are going to go all the way backwards. And I'll just pass this around. You can take a look. It's a little heavy. But you can see those ribs from front to back of the animal. So that's something that's characteristic of snakes and not our other groups. And the reason for that is simply to provide support. So that we talked about support in terrestrial animals before with your pectoral and pelvic girdles and having an arch stretching in between. Well, snakes don't have that. There are no appendages. So instead they support their body all the way up and down with those ribs that come over to the side. And so you have a bony support that's in contact with the ground, essentially. Those ribs also will help in locomotion, and we're going to talk about locomotion more in a minute. But you have these large ventral scales on many of the snakes, and we have muscles that go from the ribs down to those scales. And by contracting those muscles, the animal can move forward. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the main idea is, yes, you have all of these ribs going back and forth, and yes, they contribute to the support against gravity. But because we have muscles going from each rib to these large ventral scales, those ribs are actually aiding in locomotion as well. Right? They're aiding in locomotion by giving those muscles something firm to hang on to. All right. So how do snakes move? There's actually 4 different categories of snake locomotion. 4 broad categories. And they have lateral undulation. So 4 categories of locomotion in snakes, 4 different ways in which they can move forward despite the fact that they don't have any limbs. Lateral undulation, sometimes called concertina, is the most common, and it's used by pretty much all snakes when they're on fairly flat surfaces, in other words, on the ground. And what they're going to do, what am I doing? I really screwed that up, didn't I? Lateral undulation curvilinear or serpentine. Wow, that was bad. All right. So most books will call it lateral undulation, but I think your book does call it curvilinear. And when when the animal, the snake, is using lateral undulation, its movement is analogous to an eel, so analogous to anguilliform locomotion in the fishes. So that what we have are waves of muscular contraction that pass down the body and throw the animal into curves. Right? So it's going to be in a curved position. Now the fish is pushing against water. Remember, and the water pushes back in an equal and opposite force, and so we get a component of that that pushes the animal in the forward direction. For the snake, it can't push against the air, right? It's just not going to work. You're not going to be able to exert sufficient force against the air and the air back against you to push you forward. So instead, what that animal's doing when it wraps itself into these curves is it's pushing against irregularities in the environment. A rock, a stick, something along those lines. Oh, the reason I kept on so this is just handout 34, but it's showing you something that's very, very close to what we were talking about with the fish. In other words, you have this big dark thing, that's your irregularity in the environment. And the snake then is pushing against that. You have an equal and an opposite force. You can resolve that into 2 components, a lateral